you know, and about a year or two ago, we actually, the Florida bar, um, through the chair at that time, Sarah Kay, put on a statewide, each circuit had a full day CLE talking about childhood trauma and ACEs and the effects that it has psychologically and actual physical health of the children, if they've been exposed to these traumas. They were citing, increased chances of heart disease, diabetes, other, very serious illnesses, not counting the psychological issues with bonding and being able to form meaningful relationships in their future. And I just thought it was so interesting because I'm not sure when we look at, as lawyers, when we look at Florida Statute 6113 and we look at the factors A through T that tell us what is in the best interest of the child, I feel like it just skims the surface in light of these observations that came out of the ACEs study, as to really what is in their best interest and what's going on. And, even the little snippy comments that parents make about the other parent or, what trauma are you causing? Because, generally speaking, in family law in Florida, a little acrimony between the parents, and it's not going to do anything. It's expected almost. But the long-term effects that can have on the child is not really something that's been explored. I just think that's interesting, and I really think that what you were saying too about being able to work with who or the parent who's hired you to kind of teach them how to be a better parent or how to avoid these things and to be stronger and focus on their strengths is that's interesting because as a lawyer, I have a basic understanding, but I don't have a master's degree from the University of Alabama on these topics. And I'm trying to tell them to be a better person, be the bigger person. I make a lot of analogies to the story about King Saul and the baby, and the real mother said, just give her the kid, don't split the baby in half, just give her the kid, and being the bigger person. But, I think, that's oftentimes needed. Yeah, I know that they take a parenting course when they file for divorce and it's court ordered and required, but I don't really think it gets through, or I don't know if it really covers what it needs to cover, honestly, on how to do this and how to cope with it and how to raise a productive child. Because I always tell people, and we can play a game of gotcha with the other spouse or other parent, and they're going to play a game of gotcha with you, and we can point out who's bad or those things. But you may win in court, but your kid will certainly lose because no one is there trying to get to the root problems and co-parent and figure out how to reach an understanding that's not just placing the child in trauma, 24/7 until they turn 18. And so, that's very interesting. And one of the things just hearing you talk, people who know me, sometimes think my mind just wanders, but I was thinking about how many times we have people do a social investigation and they ask me questions about the social investigation. I've never gone through a social investigation. I've never sat in the chair. I don't know what factors are there. I don't know what's important. I don't know what my strengths and weaknesses are. Sometimes, and a lot of people don't know this, there's two types of experts. There's experts that testify and you bring them to court and they present evidence. Then sometimes you have experts that are called work product experts that are for the attorney's own mental impressions about the case and getting the case ready. And I was just sitting there thinking about, Jasmine, you'd probably make a great work product witness, to, have my client kind of evaluate it, go through the steps, look at the evidence, help me build a theory of the case, help the client and me be prepared for the social investigation and how to point out these issues productively. I never will forget a case early in my career. I thought it was a slam dunk, and the person went to the social investigation and they completed it. And when I got the report back, it was, I had 4 sessions. I did this, I did that, went through the whole methodology used. It said this parent never one time told me why he wanted to be with the child or spend time with the child. All he did was put the other parent down for the entire, duration of the evaluation. And, looking back on that, if there had been a Jasmine there, someone to not coach to lie, but coach as to how to deal with this, how to be productive, to look at what factors are, what evidence is there and what the factors really show, and to handle that in a constructive adult manner, probably been very useful. My lesson from that for the rest of my career, I have told people, go to the evaluation, don't say anything bad about the other parent whatsoever. just tell the evaluator you have some concerns. And when the evaluator wants to talk about those concerns, so you're ready to talk about the concerns, and let them bring it up and move on. Just talk about yourself and relationship with the child. That's been my advice. But I do think there's a big opportunity there for work product expert in development and developing the theory of the case and developing the client to identify these shortcomings, strengths, weaknesses, and then really what is important here in the case. And so that was just my 2 cents as I was listening to you talk, and my mind was wondering about family law because that's what I do. My wife tells me I live it, I sleep it. She's like, you're the only person I know who could pick up a case and kind of immediately start coming up with some kind of a theory about family law. But that's my passion, my why. I think you got to, like I said, have a strong why when you've been doing it over 20 years now. Um, so you know, when a family law attorney gets a case and they refer it to Nolin and Nolin and referring it to you, what does your evaluation process really look like? What do you do, and how do you typically handle that?
Typically, and varies a little bit from case to case depending on the complexity of the circumstances. But generally, given the case, usually when Nolan has is nearing completion of their piece of the investigation, and so I'll review all of the reports that they've drawn up. A lot of times, families have information that they share as well, whether the children have had psychiatric evaluations or have any medical needs or that sort of thing. Then so I would do a cursory review of all the information so I know some of the basic facts. And then I have a conversation with the parent that's hired us. And it is a conversation. So when I first introduce myself to parents, I let them know, like, you won't see a clipboard, you're not going to see a checklist. I won't be emailing you a 60-page, 60-item questionnaire. We're going to have a conversation, two people getting to know each other. One of the things I try to assure them of is I am going to be looking for your strengths and hearing from you what's good about you as a parent, what's great about your child, what your concerns are. And so then, as I said, there's 42 questions looking to answer in that conversation. And then and sometimes it's more than one conversation because I love to chat. So it makes it easier to do my role. And then parents love to talk about their children very often. So usually it's pretty easy to get people to share the information that I need to hear. And then I compare what the parent has shared with me with the evidence that's available. And there's times that I may ask the investigators to verify something for me, confirm something for me. So that way my evaluation, I can quote the parent, but I also have something evidence to back up whether it's a risk factor or a concern in that particular case. And then I draw up my evaluation and send the draft both to the investigators and to the parents. So, and after the parents had a day or two to review it, we read it together so that I can again go over that parenting piece and explain if there's. I try to use layman's terms, not a lot of professional jargon, but I do like to provide some education for the parents, some of the research that the evaluation is based on, a lot of child development, and then again, the strengths that they have as a parent and that their family has. Because I would imagine working in family law that quite often there are high expectations of you. And when you meet those expectations, you may not get a lot of attaboys. It's just expected. I think it's very much like that as parents. There are things that, getting our children to school, feeding them, clothing them, loving them, teaching them good values. That's an expectation people have of parents. And we don't often get a lot of kudos for the day in, day out of investing in our children's lives. So I think it's helpful, particularly during a time. Some divorces are probably very amicable, and I would imagine then they wouldn't need you or nor me. But when it's difficult, I think part of that parent education is also helping them to identify what they're experiencing as a parent. And sometimes the concerns they have is just you're going from being an intact family to now your child may be spending a significant part of their time out of your care with the other parent. And it's a difficult transition for a lot of people. And so helping parents to identify what they're experiencing so they can separate that from, because they can cloud your judgment. If you're hurting a great deal, if there's if your estranged spouse has wronged you in some way, it can be difficult to see clearly how much the child still needs that parent, right? For example, in a case of infidelity, it's very hurtful. It's a betrayal. It's an erosion of trust. It doesn't necessarily mean that they parent any differently. And so that can be very difficult for parents, as they're working through that time of healing to really truly consider what their child needs. One of the things I saw, and anyone who's worked with children through Department of Children and Families, like the Child Welfare System, the Children's Advocacy Center, children who they'll disclose some forms of abuse that you and I would think it's just horrific. We can't fathom it, and they still love that parent. And so it's to me, it's very important to make sure we're supporting children, so that and so there are some cases where children do need to be kept safe from their biological parent, and it's important to make those arrangements. And it's also important to honor the love that that child still has. You can love someone who's done something really terrible to you, and that can be difficult to transition to prioritizing your safety.